3.99 million people watched the mother of all talk shows last Wednesday and last Sunday, with the Sunday number still advancing. It's very likely that it will breach 4 million. I mention it because the polls that we run, the programs that we are having, the impact that they are making around the world is beginning to be significant. I can feel it in my everyday life. The number of people, I was just in London a day ago, and the number of people who came up to me to talk about our broadcasts was at an altogether new level, a new high. I mentioned that for reasons which will become clearer in a few minutes. But let's start with the very peculiar business that's happened in the last few minutes. Donald Trump put very well parsed with capital letters in the proper place, no misspellings, no syntax errors, so I assume that it was written by someone else, a report of the 1 hour, 15-minute conversation he had this afternoon with Vladimir Putin. Don't get me wrong, I'm very glad that he did, if he did. I'm very glad. I wish the two men would speak more often. There's no need, though, to make a tweet about it or even a Truth Social pronunciamento, and that might be the problem. It may be that Donald Trump's summary, on the face of it, a fair and definitely not vainglorious one, went too far or didn't go far enough for the Russian side. It might be that the Russians never agreed to any tweeting about the contents of the conversation. But Donald Trump's Truth Social post disappeared literally moments ago. It has been deleted. We can all speculate, perhaps fruitfully or not, on why that is. The most important thing is that the call took place, and in it, President Putin made clear that he, and Trump said, he said so very strongly, that he would be responding to the egregious attack in breach of all nuclear weapons treaties signed between the United States and Russia, the attack on the nuclear bombers in various air bases of the Russian Federation. This is important because the world is waiting with bated breath for that response. Will it be nuclear? Will it be Orishnik? Will it be an attack on the decision-making centers and personnel of the rump state of Ukraine? Will it be something we've never seen or even thought of before? Will it be an attack not just on Ukraine, but on the NATO powers that undoubtedly lay behind it? There is no way that this 18-month operation, which came to its fruition at the weekend, was mounted by Ukraine alone, because it depended upon satellite information, and Ukraine has no satellites. Somebody who does have a satellite gave them the information that they needed to target the drones that hit 4, perhaps 5 of Russia's nuclear bombers. I can answer one point that was raised last week. Why were nuclear bombers not under hard shell covering? Why were they sitting out on the tarmac? It turns out that this is a requirement of the nuclear weapons treaties between Russia and the United States, that both countries will leave their nuclear bombers in plain sight of each other's satellites. So Russia was observing the letter of the nuclear agreements with the United States, but the United States was not observing to the letter or anything else its obligations under those treaties to Russia, because the United States undoubtedly knew that the Ukrainians had been planning for 18 months to launch this attack on these nuclear bombers. Now, 18 months, for those of you who can do arithmetic, was in the presidential period of Joe Biden, though Joe himself would probably not have known that. But his auto pen knew that. He knew from the beginning that this operation, which is a breach of the nuclear treaty obligations between the two countries, was in the pipeline. Donald Trump, though, has been in since January, and it is now June, though in my country at least, it sure doesn't feel like it. The 5 months, nearly 6, that Donald Trump has been the president have been an improvement in terms of attitude towards the Ukraine war, but it has been hot and cold. 1 minute he is the man that campaigned as the peace president who was going to end the Ukraine war in a day, in an afternoon, in an hour, with a phone call. Pick your hyperbole. But he hasn't done any of that. He did stop briefly the supply of weapons, and he did stop briefly the supply of intelligence, only to reinstate both of them. So hot and cold on Ukraine is the best description of the Trump presidency so far. But it begs the question that we are asking in the poll tonight. Did Trump okay the Ukraine attacks on Russia? Yes or no? But this is a trick question, you see. Because if Trump did not okay them, then the people that work for him in the deep state are taking him for a potentially existential ride. Now, Donald likes a ride, but he has no intention, I believe, of seeing the end of humanity, the end of the United States of America in a nuclear conflagration with a nuclear-armed hypersonic superpower. The alternative answer to the question is that he did not okay it, that he was hoodwinked by the people who were operating a Biden-era plan, didn't tell him, in which case Donald Trump is not really the president, definitely not the commander-in-chief, and is being fooled with the wool pulled over his eyes by his own operatives. A clue to that being the proper explanation, the accurate explanation, is that no sooner had Mike Pompeo, the formerly fat controller of the CIA, now a lean and hungry killer, and Lady Lindsey Graham, the senator for South Carolina, who incidentally spent $413,000 of American public money on his hotel accommodation in Kiev. Now, I've lived in Kiev. You can get the best hotel suite in the entire city of Kiev. You can get a 4-girl, 10-girl, 20-hand massage and live the life of Riley in Kiev for $500, not $413,000. But that's what Lindsey Graham did. And his fellow senator, Blumenthal, spent even more, $460,000 for a weekend in Kiev. That's a lot of blow. That's a lot of blow jobs. That is a lot of corruption. Because who signed off the expenses run up by both men? Well, somebody called Lindsey Graham, who is the chairman of the Budget Committee. So the US taxpayer paid $1 million almost in one weekend to 2 senators to go abroad and breach the Logan Act, which forbids US officials to travel abroad in order to sabotage the policy of the sitting President of the United States. And there can't be many people who don't believe that that's exactly what they did. Senator Graham mocked President Trump, despite Trump openly supporting Graham in his now hotly contested primary race to be the Republican candidate in the upcoming Senate elections. He said, "Some say that you have no cards, but you've got lots of cards." And no sooner had he said it than the attack on the nuclear bombers began. He mocked President Trump, and he undoubtedly undermined the stated policy of the American president of negotiating an end to this war. Blumenthal and Graham both exhorted the Ukrainian state to still more ferocious fighting and taking the war directly to the Russians rather than seeking to defend the territory in Ukraine that they still currently hold. Now, these trips by American officials, Mike Pompeo and Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, these were wrecking, sabotaging efforts. Of that there is no doubt, and Donald Trump is yet to make any comment on it. And I, for one, await that comment anxiously. But there's no doubt that the satellite that guided the drones to their target in the nuclear air bases was an American satellite. That much I can tell you for free. There is no doubt that the British government were involved in the entire matter also. And that's why it's important now for the United States to openly break with their former European allies on the subject of Ukraine. Donald Trump may have done so in the call this afternoon. I wish that that were so. But he's going to have to do it publicly because the former allies of the Americans, the French, the British, the Germans, little Mark Rutte, the head of NATO, are all turning up the dial for more war. And that's an existential threat to all of us. Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, who reached rock bottom levels of public approval in the polls this week, falling to 12% approval. 12% approval. Was nonetheless out on the podium announcing dramatic new postures. And postures is, for the moment, exactly what they are. That Britain is now on a war footing. That his mission is to get Britain war ready. War ready for war with Russia, the possessor of the largest number of nuclear weapons in the world. This, as the Prime Minister of a country that is literally going down the drain. It is in a state of economic, social, and cultural paralysis and crisis. He cannot stop a dinghy bringing military-aged young men sailing across the English Channel and landing on the beaches thereafter for an indeterminate time of years, costing the rest of us £220 per day in hotel accommodation alone. But he's going to fight the Russians. He can't smash the gangs, but he's going to smash the Russians. He can't smash the organized criminals who are sailing these poor, hapless refugees, illegal migrants, whatever you're going to call them. But he's going to stop the largest army in Europe, battle-hardened after all this time, at the battlefront in Ukraine. And little Rutte made a fool of himself this afternoon. He said that NATO is more powerful than the Roman Empire and more powerful than the Napoleonic Empire. Now, people who think they're Napoleon are quite commonly found in Ward 5 at Broadmoor and other similar institutes for the criminally insane. It's odd that the General Secretary of NATO should choose Napoleon of all people as an exemplar of his military prowess, although Mark Rutte has never fired a gun in anger in his puff, if you get my meaning. But the vainglory of that statement shows the scale of the problem that we have. These runts, Ruttes and runts, in London, in Paris, in Brussels, and in Berlin are dragging us to Armageddon. And Donald Trump has to stop it. He has to put these puppets back into their boxes. He has to tell them that they can no longer go around the world threatening people with America's army, because America's army ain't coming. America is butting out of the Ukraine war. That'll bring it to a close quite quickly, if I'm any judge. I want to move on only because I have an important issue that we must discuss. It is the YouGov Eurotrack survey, a massive survey, not by Moats, but by YouGov, a pro-NATO, pro-EU, pro-Israel polling company. YouGov Eurotrack survey has just shown that the bottom has fallen out of the market so far as Israel in Western Europe is concerned. Here are the figures. In Spain, Israel's standing is at minus 55. In Denmark, minus 54. In Italy, minus 52. In France, minus 48. In the UK, minus 46. And in Germany, which has practically allowed itself to be annexed by Tel Aviv, it's minus 44. And across all 6 countries, just 6 to 16% view Israel's response in Gaza since October 7th as having been proportionate. Now, these figures fill my heart with joy. They square with what we see and hear on social media, on the streets, in protests, in boycotts, in empty McDonald's, in empty Starbucks, and all the rest. Squares with that. Makes me very happy to see those figures. For I was in this cause when those figures would have been, at the very least, reversed. But I want to ask a bigger question. Because we all claim, at least, to be democracies, how can it be that the overwhelming majority of the public in Western European countries now despise Netanyahu's Israel, consider them to be conducting wholesale, unjustified slaughter, but the vast majority of politicians in those same Western countries and the vast majority of journalists and broadcasters in those same European countries continue to shill for Israel, continue to arm Israel, continue to roll out a red carpet in every international fora up to and including the Eurovision Song Contest for Israel. How does that work? Why would politicians, who after all depend on people's votes to continue being politicians, why would they fly so dramatically, seismically, in the face of their own public opinion? You've got to ask yourself that question very, very seriously. Because one of the two possible answers to it strikes at the very heart of any pretense that we might have of being a democracy. More of that in the next hour and a half and more. It is the mother of all talk shows.